Let's talk about animating on a path, animating some typography on a path, and maybe just an image on a path. So I've got some typography on a type layer that I've typed in here, and that's a lot of typing. So I've got some typography, and I'm going to animate this. Now I could easily animate it moving across screen. I mean, I could move it over here, and I could open up my position keyframe with the P key or toggle it open here. I could add a keyframe, move to a third of a second here, move up, move a little bit more, move down, move a little bit more, move up, and so on. And now I've got several keyframes that animate this typography up and down through the screen. But that may not be what I want. Maybe I want it to look like it's actually flowing along this path. I could still come in and edit individual points and keyframes and change the Bezier curve and location and where this animates to, but it still just kind of orients right side up here. It doesn't kind of flow along as if it might be each of these letters on a roller coaster riding along this curve. Or if I wanted to animate some typography around a circle or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and Command Z a few times, edit, undo, back to the point before I created any of these keyframes, and I'm going to move my typography back up here. One of the beautiful things that you can do with some typography is actually utilize a mask within that typography to animate our typography along. And what I'm going to choose is my pen tool up here at the top. And as soon as you create the pen tool, we're going to talk about this a little bit in another exercise, but the pen tool for the most part either creates shapes or masks. If you don't have any layer selected, it's going to create a shape layer. If you've got a layer selected, which I do, it's going to create a mask for that layer. So if I were to click on this pen tool, I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just going to click a few times, and if I go in and create this interesting shape here, and then I close it out, clicking over my original point, it's going to create a mask. It created a mask so that only the things that show are within that shape. Everything else is hidden. It creates a mask. So I'm going to undo that. I don't necessarily want to create a mask. I don't want to close it out. What I do want to do is utilize that shape to actually animate my typography on. So what I'm going to do, and I've undid there to the beginning, is I'm going to start to use my pen tool, but I'm not going to complete the mask. I'm not going to click where I started from on my original point. Now, I can click and make a hard point, like a peak, like a mountain peak, or I can click with my pen tool and click and hold and drag, and I get this kind of Bezier curve. This is a whole nother ball game if you haven't utilized Bezier curves or created things with vector graphics like Illustrator and things like that. This tool might be not that intuitive for you to create lines, but that's basically how you do it. Click to create a point, click and drag to create a point that has a curve to it. So I've created this interesting line here, and it's created a mask within my type layer, but it's not masking anything yet because I haven't created a pointer, kind of enclosed it in a shape. And what I can do now that I've got that mask layer, I can close up my layer and open it up again. And instead of the transformation area, I'm going to look in my my type area, and then I'm going to open up my path options area for my type. And right here, my path options for my path, I can choose that mask. So it's going to utilize this mask as a path for my type. And as soon as I do that, notice my type kind of locks into place on my path. Now I want to animate it along that path. And what happens when I choose that mask 1 as my path options, I can change all these different and keyframe all these different things. You're probably just going to want to stick with one, like the first margin or the last margin. And notice if I increase or decrease the value of the first margin, that typography moves along that path. So let's say that I wanted to keyframe this moving through. I'll go all the way into the negatives here, way back, maybe even all the way till it's off screen. And I'm going to keyframe it at the start here. And then over the course of 1.5 seconds, I'm going to move and I'm going to change that parameter. It's going to create my second keyframe, and I'm going to move this across screen. So now it's created that second keyframe. And now I have a beautiful animation of my typography moving across that custom path that I created. You'll also see the blue line is just a guide. It's not going to show up if I render. And if I were to click outside of that layer, just kind of down here in kind of this empty area, or select a different layer, you'll see that blue line is kind of hidden. It's just there as a guide. I could go back in and change it and things like that if I wanted to, but it's not going to actually show up in a render of this movie. So that's a beautiful way of creating a custom animation with your typography flowing over these curves. You can do similar things with, let's say, a still image. I've got my airplane here, and I want to create a custom. I could create a custom path with that, or I could actually go in and just create my motion with my position keyframes. I'll create a keyframe, move up here. Whoop. I wanted to move time first. Move time, move my position up top, move time, create these keyframes. So now I have a motion of this airplane flowing through. I can still go back in and select any particular keyframe and change its position, adjust the Bezier curves. Notice if I click on the center point, I can move that point around. If I click on the handlebars, I can adjust how acute this angle is for that curve. I can move this around, change these all over if I wanted to, and my airplane kind of moves across the screen. One of the other things that you may want to do if you have an instance like this, I may want to go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, and orient my specific object to the path. So auto orient along path, and now my airplane is oriented along the path. Uh-oh, it's flying backwards, but I mean, I could adjust that as well. I'm going to have to do some inverting. I could go to Layer, Transform, Flip Vertical, Layer, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and now I got my airplane kind of moving along that path. Maybe I want to even go even further and kind of play around with my rotation tool here and rotate it so that it's perfectly on that line there as it comes down this swooping curve here. So that is one way of creating animated paths, especially you may want to consider this with typography.